That's a good idea.
Yeah, because this is.
Were you recording the whole time?
No, I was not,
okay.
because that's I figured.
Yeah, I forgot to think about that.
But it would have been actually funny if I had. But I'm kind of trying to make like a very strict policy in terms of how I'm doing this. I don't want to. I don't want to surprise anybody. I don't want anybody to get ticked off about anything that I record, edit, throw into the final or whatever. That's not part of the deal. But yeah, I mean, this is exactly the kind of stuff that that I thought would be valuable to retrieve. This is what's been funny because, and like, in terms of the sort of the irony that I play with the ion experience rolled into our level, or spiral return with Bob. It's like I'm Canadian, I'm into Marshall McLuhan, and I'm into astrology, which he says is completely irrelevant.
Okay. 3 strikes.
3 strikes, you're out.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, but if I'm truly to follow ionic advice, I'm following my bliss. So what does it matter what Ion thinks or what Bob thinks about what I'm doing? If I'm following my bliss, then I'm still with the program.
Right. Yeah.
So
and that's one of the things I like about. Earlier, I was saying that I certainly appreciate Ion's subversion of expectations or something in some sense, or just leveling up expectations from like a group. Just the way that it's good to see that, people who are just sort of trying their best to assimilate and repeat the dogma or something get, mocked and like discouraged from coming back. Like, these are not the people we want or something, right? It's like, it's one thing to have this like very authoritative guru figure who's telling you all this stuff, but then they are also demonstrating that the people that they like best and like interacting best are the people who are sort of feisty in their disagreements with him or their opposition to him, or they're sort of a defiant, like, well, yeah, you can shit on that if you want, but I'm into it kind of thing.
Right. Or what's that saying that is it Groucho Marx? It says, I wouldn't want to be the member of any club that would take me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, present. So, but what you were saying, that it's like, in terms of the Mercury retrograde retrieval that I was talking about just before we started recording, is that it's like we're all kind of spinning back on the spiral, and with the whole, the sort of outrage that we were feeling back in those days, and how it's sort of,
right. I'll try to sort of like quickly recap what I was just saying there before we started recording. That like a big part of what was really valuable about Bob in the years when we were like the kind of 2002 or 3 to up until the emergence of Ion, when we were sort of interacting, we had like a little kind of community going on of Bob fans that got really disrupted with Ion. It was very like, it was very strange. But the way that the pattern that it had settled into was, part of what made it so valuable was that people either don't remember, they weren't old enough, that it was very similar back in the W. Bush days as to the Trump days in terms of people being so agitated by the president. But people were just tearing their hair out at his like desecration of the sacred image of the president of the United States by, being someone who like apparently he seemed stupid and boorish, and he was sort of, he like couldn't talk properly. And then he was like bringing in this sort of like a really crude level of cronyism going on that was just like, people were kind of like, come on, you're supposed to keep that a little more on the down low even, you know?
And pushing like unbelievable propaganda, you know, the whole like the mission accomplished stuff, you know, that kind of.
Yeah, some stuff that was.
Yeah, some stuff that was
like you weren't sure.
Like you weren't sure, does anyone believe this? Like, is it possible to believe it? Like they were, like, yeah, like sometimes it just seemed like it was a troll or something, or that it almost seemed sometimes like the target audience was the people who hated him to agitate them even more, not so much talking to the choir of people who like took him seriously or something. It almost just seemed like some weird flex of like, look how it was like an intimidation thing, that it's like, look, we don't even have to keep up appearances anymore. Like, doesn't that make you feel that much more demoralized, that your leaders are not even, they don't even seem constrained by appearances? They're sort of able to let it hang out, like, yeah, we're just fucking corrupt assholes up here, that's fine, we're gonna go to war based on nothing, and all your protests don't matter, and we're gonna just flagrantly use that to make millions of dollars for ourselves, and like, what are you gonna do? So it was really kind of maddening. And so Bob was someone who was able to explain, was able to make it make sense, not just put some words on it that illuminated it more, but that actually made it seem natural, or like makes sense. Like, of course we have a president like this. That makes sense because of these developments. Like, whereas what's making people so agitated about a figure like W. Bush is that they have obsolete expectations of what the president's supposed to be, right? So, yeah, I mean, that value of Bob really comes back. But, and so the thing that I was saying, though, is that in terms of the great disruption of ION, the fact that ION first emerged in the opening months of the new presidential administration, that like, it's a different world. I was using the analogy of like the presidential administration's always, a changing presidential administration always makes me think of seeing some like really loud live band that does like a sort of a drone rock kind of thing, where they have like a really loud bass chord being held on a keyboard for many minutes, to the point where you almost forget about it. It's just part of the landscape, and then suddenly the chord changes. So it makes sense that when the chord changed and Obama came in, and that's obviously a very different style of president, more along the lines of image-wise what people expected, that, you know, Bob's art form would have to mutate as well, because Bob had in the past sometimes gone on about how you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. You know, you'll basically lose your artist credentials if you just settle into a rut. You know, that in order to be an artist and create something of a semi anti-environment that might help people glimpse something of the Medusa of the present without dying, then, you know, you gotta switch it up.
Yeah. So do you mind if we do a bit of retrievals and kind of go back in time? I know at least that you had heard of Bob for probably a bunch of years before I did.
Well, I don't know about a bunch of years. With me, it was weird because
with the church,
I was familiar with the Subgenius.
Yeah, that's
for a couple of years, not a lot, not very long.
Okay.
But like maybe 99, I think I first got into Subgenius.
Okay.
99 or 2000, and then it was 2002 in the summer that I first encountered Bob's writings online. So, and when I first met him was later in 2002. I went to New York and met him. So the times that we both saw him in Toronto were really shortly after that, like 2004, I think, was his visit when he gave a speech at the Coach House.
So yeah, so maybe it wasn't until like 2003 that I stumbled on him, because for whatever reason I thought that it was closer to September 11th than maybe it was, because I had been, you know, pretty deeply buried in conspiracy theory sites at the time, you know, and you know, and it was actually through Cloak and Dagger you know, the radio show, and then when I found you guys on the message board. Oh, wait a second. We've
Upgraded.
removed the 40-minute time limit on your group meeting. Love it. Zoom just
Okay.
gave me a gift, so
Cool.
we must be on the right track.
Nice. Thanks, Zoom.
Thank you,
I
Zoom.
didn't know there was such a limit.
Yeah, with the free version, everything that I'm doing so far has all been free, except for just there's one. I think it was like where I have my website, but everything else, it's amazing what you can do for free right now.
Mhm.
Anyway, so yeah, so it was the Cloak and Dagger message board when I met you guys first, and then Bob would pop on every once in a while and bark like a dog and say something,
Yeah.
you know, like shitty about the show and how
Mhm.
stupid everyone was. And I was like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
That's kind of how it was for me, you know?
Yeah.
So how about you?
Yeah. Well, Bob was no longer on Cloak and Dagger as of like October, November 2002. So if you were actually listening to him on the show, that would have been 2002. But I guess 2003 he was probably still kibitzing on the message board or something,
definitely.
like
He
while
was
he wasn't on
poking.
the show anymore.
He was poking Lenny.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Lenny Bloom.
Oh, I'd like to reread some of those crazy message board archives. That could be interesting. When none of us were familiar with what we were dealing with yet at all.
I'm still in shock, and I don't even want to think about, you know, how I lost Bon Echo's board, which I have actually recreated on my new website in a new form. I've called it Bon Echo's board 2.21.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah, that's a sad loss.
yeah.
For
me personally, I like lost all sorts of my own. I had a pretty tumultuous last decade that included like losing just about everything that I own, including my whole beautiful, awesome book collection and lots of my like notes and notebooks and various stuff that was really hard to have lost. But you know, among the things that I lost were my only copies of, you know, the original tapes, as well as my only copies of when I met Bob in New York the first time, and like interview, kind of an extensive interview. You know?
I remember your
and I was like really proud of this interview. I thought it was great. His answers were great. And so these days, all that survives of that is like one answer that I made a point of posting on alt.slack at some point, and then some other answer that I ended up posting on Five Bodied later, you know, but all the rest of it is gone, including like, because like part of it was him like interpreting some of my dreams, and he was just like, oh, these are so easy, it's perfect, these dreams are about my essays, like no wonder you're dreaming that after you read my essays. And oh, they're so good. I can sort of remember the substance of it somewhat, but yeah, so that's pretty disappointing that I was really hoping to, because I had posted the whole thing on Bon Echo's board, but so then that was gone. But it's just so dumb. It's like this, like I'm literally, you know, looking back on the only reason I didn't just post the whole interview on alt.slack was out of some stupid, misguided sense of tact, or of trying to not be that guy that's just cramming the guy they hate down their throat. Like I was literally like, I'm like, oh, I'll just post this excerpt that I think is actually kind of like they might even find interesting, because it's this dream it's a weird, surreal dream, funny dream, and kind of a funny interpretation. And I'll ask, is anybody interested in hearing the next dream interpretation? And I'll only post it if someone says yes. That way, I'm not that annoying guy who's just forcing it down their throat. And it's like, later on, I'm like, boy, I wish I'd just been that fucking annoying guy who'd forced it down their throat. Then I would still have it. I'd be able to go into Google's archives and I wouldn't have totally lost it, you know. So it's like, yeah,
I
yeah,
know,
too
I
bad.
know. I feel somewhat the same, you know, like, and that's kind of again why I'm doing what I'm doing now. It's like, well, what the hell else am I going to do? You know, you know, if we're going to have to find ways to survive by building businesses online, well, you know, maybe part of that vehicle is something that's fun for me, but also valuable to some of the people that I'm talking about. Because a lot of the times when I talk to people, you know, if I'm giving them a tarot reading or they're asking me about astrology or something, it's usually because they're trying to figure something out, you know, and so it's like, and then it's like I realize how many people, you know, kind of hate themselves for not being able to get past certain habits or patterns that, you know, that they know are not helpful to them. And it's kind of like, do you have any idea how much media messes with you? You know, and it's amazing. It's like seriously, cut yourself some slack, you know, because and that was a big part of what I found refreshing about Bob and McLuhan theory generally, from a holistic perspective, you know.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought that it was important. So I thought, well, you know, here we are, it's like, you know, 15, 20 years later, and, you know, Bob knowledge, I know, is the only thing that's keeping me sane right now.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of people really freaking out.
I would be totally freaking out. I mean, I am totally freaking out, really. But still,
Me
it's
too, but, you know,
but something. It's more like the Bob and Ion angle helps to perceive certain like silver linings about the situation or something. Just in the sense that it's like, in the midst of these incredible disasters that, you know, I don't know, it's pretty bad, whatever. In the midst of all these disasters, there's still you can think about certain silver linings, like, you know, Bob and Ion talk about celebrating basically that this is like a death blow to the university system that had grown toxic, you know, that toxic and counterproductive academia situation that, like, as much as it might, that, you know, the vision of going to post-secondary education as something that is like a whole environment that you go into and live in, and it's like the city within the city kind of thing, that it's, you know, that's like a beautiful dream, and like no one like wants to lose that or something, but it's really just getting worse and worse, you know, like that it's just turning into a racket of extracting enormous amounts of money from people to facilitate that experience, and the prices just going up and up and up, and the quality going down and down and down, and all these you know, just the sort of toxic patterns that emerge from when you have entrenched, like, as you know, tenure is a great idea. It's like wonderful. It would be nice if they weren't trying to cancel tenured professors all the time. And yet that also creates an ability to consolidate a sort of a conservative attitude that acts as an anchor on everybody's minds or something. So just these things where, I don't know, it's interesting. I'm not sure why I necessarily went to the academia one first, but it's not that I like have a whole lot of these silver linings in my mind, but you know.
No, I definitely, it's a very interesting point, because isn't it kind of, you know, one of those things that McLuhan, you know, one of the most controversial things that he said was that the dumbing down of America was well underway and had been for, hundreds of years. And so it's like, and it's astonishing to me actually how much it's accelerated in this last 15 years because I'm fairly certain, did you go to OCAD?
No,
Oh,
not me.
Why did I
My
think
friend Nigel did. So we were sort of joined at the hip in those years. So you might be remembering that he went to OCAD, or I lived near OCAD as well.
Okay.
So I was kind of around there a lot.
Okay. Because my daughter went there and she was like, I was very disappointed for her in terms of the experience. There was more politics going on than there was like, she was at OCAD for God's sakes. Politics? Like, come on.
Yeah.
And and it's like, while there was definitely politics back when I was at Sheridan, it didn't permeate, like you still had the ability to focus on your work, and find refuge in it, as I found, for the short time that I was there. But I think it's a really good point, to say that, this is exactly why I wanted to talk to you, because I knew that, from different perspectives and just, catching up to Bob in terms of what he's talking about now and what he and Ion have been plucking from everything. But, it's kind of uncanny to me, just like how we kind of saw this all coming.
I mean, I can't say that I saw it coming. I guess I kind of wish I could, but then that would just frustrate me more if I didn't prepare better for it. Lines like off, right, about the media, or on Bob's media ecology, at least the 90s Bob, or the CKLN Bob, that his line was that we just make it, this is your mantra, just turn it off, like turn off TV, whatever, right? Turn off TV would be the one that he would settle on. But the idea, and also it created this sort of interesting probe that it's like, hey, if everybody turned off TV, how would we know whether everybody did it? Like, how would we know whether that experiment was successful, like, other than by turning it back on and hearing the report about how everyone turned off their TV or something like that. It's actually this much more profound, almost an act of faith doing it, that like you're either just disconnecting from everybody, or you're maybe trusting that more people are going to do that. But it's just interesting because it really set up this thing where to turn it off, like, yes, the whole point of McLuhan is that a medium is a lot more than just the main usual suspects that you think of, like the communication media, like a chair is a medium, and etc., like different type cars and all of everything you do, just not just even objects that people use, but like just patterns of behavior are a medium. Going out to the bar is a medium,
Yeah.
something like the bar is a medium. And it's like, yes, we know that. But when Bob was talking about like turn it off as media ecology idea, he would generally defer towards talking about, if he's going to talk about a specific example, he would bring up like TV and these communication media ideas. So to me, what really kind of threw me for a loop about 2020 was that it was that on its head. Like, instead it was turn it off, everything, all the non-screen media, all the AP media, all the in-person, all the stuff you do with your chemical body, turn off those media. Because the idea would be like, wouldn't ever, if it's like this cliche thing, like, oh, if only we could get over our addiction to these screens, like if only maybe it would be better if the internet like went down or something, and then we would all go out and, remember how fulfilling it is to go fishing in the local stream or something like that, right? Like something more real, And so it seems like such a disaster that way, because it's like all of the stuff that could be said to be real has been canceled, that at least involves real, not just like the chemical body, but the AP in the sense of like your actual, like, you know, where you live rather than just how you think about it or what you say about it kind of thing, or how you feel about it. That all that got canceled was just really, yeah, to me, it just seemed like a kind of an opposite of what, of a sort of a Bob vision, or of something that I had like maybe been preparing for on some level. Like I felt like if the internet had gone down, and it's like suddenly people are like, hey, the internet doesn't work anymore and we're not sure we can get it back up again, we're gonna have to rebuild it. You know, I would be a lot less fucked up by that than a lot of people. Even if I had lost lots of stuff online, you know, I could be like, well, I kind of, you know, you can't rely on that. It sort of makes sense. It's almost like a good thing spiritually for the thing that you know you can't really rely on to disappear, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Well, you shouldn't have relied on it or something. But going to meet someone and talk over a coffee or something, that would be that they would turn that off.
yep.
I didn't expect it.
No, I can't say that I expected that either. I mean, when I say that, you know, we saw it coming, I see of it more as that we saw that there was a path and a script in place that began a long time ago. And that you know, that really there was nothing any of us could truly do about it. You know, other than, you know, understand the reality of the environment that you're in order to navigate your way through, and not become roadkill. Are you still there, Brian? Oh, okay. Are you good? Is it good?
I'm good. It's starting off good. Starts
Okay.
off.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, in terms of seeing that as like a path that's up to something like this, I mean, yeah, we had been at least prepared in the sense of this very valuable set of memoirs, that he provided about to just add some nuance to the sort of conspiracy world of where people talk about who's doing what, that this distinction between the world solar government, the universal government, and then the mythic government, process of locking down each one successively. And so this whole idea of like, yeah, people talking about the world government, like that's in the past, man. They locked that down a long time ago. Like you're living in that world government, right? You have been for years. Those institutions were set up long before you were born. Like, and yeah, I guess what people imagine when they say world government is like a late stage world government where it's had a long time to really impose itself. But you know, so just for him to be saying like, look, that's a fait accompli, like don't even worry about that, like that what's more going on, that we're living in this stage of locking down the mythic government, right? And then moving on to this mysterious next stage of lockdown Bob rule. But just the idea of like locking down the mythic government, I mean, what a valuable phrase to know that's, you know, because that's, to me, that's a great phrase for what happened in 2020, you know, that like it's all well and good for them to have a system set up that's like heavily controlled and kind of conspirified or whatever, but like, you know, there was lots of like there were plenty of social deterrents to believing weird things or in conspiracies or something, but you were still, you know, the only consequence you were going to face was the social consequences of like people, rolling their eyes or thinking you're crazy or whatever. But like you wouldn't be prevented from telling people stuff, right? You wouldn't be
Well,
prevented from challenging the prevailing myth, and you wouldn't be threatened with like, well, one day you're not going to be able to function in this society if you keep thinking things like that and challenging the dominant myth.
well, here's the funky part, and this is where the astrology shit comes in. That's kind of interesting because not only, do we have like the same astrology happening or similar patterns in astrology happening right now that coincide with the rise of fascism. The last pattern in this particular cycle happened in 33. So, it's kind of interesting that it's like, we've got the same, like literally those energies, those same astrological alignments, are occurring right now, as marking the beginning of that. So in addition to that, it's like, there are similar astrological things to September 11th too. Like we're on this little patterny thing. And what was I going to say? There was something that you mentioned, and I thought, and I got a little derailed there for a second. But it's like the same alignments that are coinciding with fascism are the same ones that are bringing innovations in technology. So it's this double-edged sword thing that we're tracking on. Are you still? Oh,
Right.
There we go.
Oh, I'm still here.
Yeah, there it is.
Me?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's actually
Okay, cool.
There's actually a bunch of notes that I made, and I thought, this is a set of notes that only Linus Minimax would understand.
Cool.
Just because.
Excellent.
Just because of the detail, because it's like, hey, I'm tracking this and I'm tracking that, and it's like because I can remember, when I was all up about the Freemasons, and Bob said, it doesn't matter, like that's propaganda for for the monarchy.
Right.
So
right.
Speaking of which, do you ever watch The Crown?
No. I did, on Ion's recommendation, I watched some of a show called Reign, Reign, but I never saw The Crown.
Ooh, I should check that out then, because I've been digging The Crown, like, and really, like,
Yeah, it was all right.
The first 2 seasons of The Crown are the ones that I repeat, like, I don't know, it's I don't know whether I got some kind of weird nostalgia for that time period, but yeah.
Right.
But, yeah, so this is a little note thing. Maybe I'll send a copy of this to you so you can take a look at it another time.
Oh wow, cool.
But it's like, because it's like, and then how it kind of ties into all the stuff we were tracking when we were talking about back in those days, and how it's like, because that unnameable force that is sort of the target of all conspiracy theory, like this whole Q thing, it like miniaturized all of the conspiracy theory stuff, turned it into something tiny, and literally crumpled it up like a piece of paper and threw it away.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just
isn't
like,
that bizarre?
are you kidding me? Did that really just happen?
Yeah. It's pretty that's a pretty impressive mutation in the in the conspiracy world that way, that they managed to just sort of create a brand that created a world that way.
That could
And it's still
actually
going.
be compartmentalized in such a way that it wasn't just canceled, it was deleted.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, isn't that funky? You know, like, because I didn't, like, this is what I mean, that force, that unnameable force, you know, like whether it's, you know, things like the Freemasons or the Fabian Society, these are patient agendas that stretch over generations.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
that's kind of, and, you know, and again, is kind of tracked in things like astrology. So, you know, this is kind of, you know, all of these various points that I've found that I'm going like, oh my God, you know, like these are some pretty intense times. So it's like I said, it's kind of like, I think it's time to share, you know, be a gateway to Bob, because like, you know, like I you know, I can throw people to Bob, but at the same time, they're not gonna get the same kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, you don't know where they're gonna land. Like, what's the next thing he's gonna say after they are like, okay, I'll tune in, and it might just be exactly the thing that makes them think there's nothing to it. So
I'm Donald
Trump.
Trump.
Definitely
I'm
providing
of the White
vestibules to Bob is a good idea. Yeah. No, but I mean, in terms of seeing this coming, what happened this year, in some sense, like we certainly, you know, being plugged into Bob World gave us some opportunity, at least like some chance. I mean, yeah, I was pretty. It's not something you really know what to do with, but the fact that, you know, Ion really was, it was like all of 2019, he didn't go a show, it seemed, without getting on this, like, it got really annoying, where he was like, every show he'd be like, it's gonna be bring out your dead, you know, like it's gonna be plague times. Like, he was like relentlessly warning about that for like a full year. So it's like, oops, I didn't really take that seriously. But it's also just this idea, the more basic McLuhan-y idea, that it's like, yes, it's all well and good to, like, it's very good to educate yourself about you know, these long-term agendas, these like conspiracy agendas going on, that it's not all just like, oh, everything's drifting around with everyone just sort of individually trying to make profit, and then the future happens by accident. Like, no, there are people who have some ability to steer and a plan to steer, and they are trying to steer towards certain things. And it's good to know about that. But this is the thing, it's like what happened this year was, it really was this more McLuhan level deal, where it's like, yeah, it's all well and good to know that there's this sort of like vaccine battle, like that over the years, they're slowly trying to erode people's sense that they can make their own healthcare decisions, or, you know, that there is such a thing as organic, and that's a value or something. You know, they want, yeah, it's all well and good to know that they want to erode that and to resist it or something. It's all well and good to know that they are long-term goal trying to transition to like a cashless society, because then every transaction can be surveilled and potentially canceled, et cetera, that there are all these agendas. But then just having those as separate figures, where you're like, the elite want this, and so you sort of are caught up in fighting that battle as you perceive it only within the horizon of that it's like, yeah, like the thing, the more McLuhan notion, you know, that Bob's always countering, like, yeah, you got to study your LaRouche, but temper it with McLuhan, and study your McLuhan, temper it with LaRouche. That, you know, that the more McLuhan idea would be like, okay, so thought experiment, like, let's try to be anticipatory. What would be, try to new environment that would kill several of these agenda birds with one stone, you know? And then that's what ended up happening. Like, you get a new environment that just naturally accelerates the vaccine thing and accelerates the cashless thing and accelerates the total surveillance of all conversations because they're not happening over the analog airspace between two people anymore. They're all online and, you know, surveillable. That so just the idea of like, imagine, you know, what we should have been doing was brainstorming what we introduce that would you know, revolutionize all those agendas and help them all at once. You know, that could have helped to anticipate something like, well, you know, I should have seen that you know, that the next big threat, like what are they going to declare war on next? Like, I should have known that it would be the common cold. Like, damn, that's like just so perfect. Like, that's so, like, what a hilarious, you know, as much as I hate it, that's like a really funny punchline that like people are like, what'll come next? Like the war on terror, like war on drugs. Okay, like that's one thing because drugs are an actual thing. A war on terror, people are like, we're fighting a war against an abstract thing. And it's like, well, yeah, and just imagine like, so then what's going to be next? And yeah, instead it's like, well, now we are plunged in a war against, like, we used to be all casual about, we just let people catch colds and like it was no big deal. Like, oh, what were we thinking? And like now with no more of that, like, oh my god. So yeah, it's like, yeah, just the idea like could have should have seen maybe something like this coming, but you know, not that we failed necessarily, although I guess we did, but just in terms of, you know, that praising Bob's influence or something, like we certainly had better opportunities than most people to maybe see something like 2020 coming, especially since he kept associating the word lockdown with this like coming world that his 2020, he had it dated as when he finishes locking it down or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that like it's I don't think we could have done anything to prevent anything, you know?
Yeah.
But it's kind of, you know, oh, I remember another thing that when you were talking earlier about the whole you know, unplugging from it all, turn it off and everything. Do you remember my experience with that?
I guess not.
Okay, because this was one of my biggest Bob moments actually, and it was I can remember the day very clearly, and it was, you know, just my usual morning rituals of, you know, reading, you know, the news, the Cloak and Dagger, whether it was my board by that time, Five Bodied even. Maybe it was right at the beginning of Five Bodied. Could have been. And so you know, I have my coffee, I'm at the computer, I'm doing my reading, and I'm checking in with CNN. Ha ha ha. I wonder what CNN has to say, you know, this afternoon, kind of deal. So I pop onto CNN, and there's this headline, like, and it was like one of those things I noticed back in those days. There would be headlines that would be on the ticker on the bottom, but nobody would ever talk about the story, and I couldn't find any story online written to back up the headline.
Weird. Yeah.
Like, I can't even tell you how many times that happened, right? So it was all these like little carrots, because I mean, I was processing information on ridiculous levels because my OCD around everything at that time was off the charts. And so I was tracking stuff really. It's like, well, why can't I find this? Why can't I find this? And then I see a headline, and it's a headline that causes like a deeply emotional response in me of rage, and that they're going to appoint Kissinger to the head of the 9/11 Commission.
Right.
Nobody ever talked about it. There was never a story, but it came on my screen, And I was just like,
Right.
that's it. And I pushed my chair away from the table. I said, you know what? I'm turning it off. That's it. You fuckers have been fucking with my head for long enough. And I typed into the forum, I'm done. This is my media fast. You finally convinced me. I'm tapping out. And so I made my announcement on the forum, and I turned off my computer. And in those days, like, much as it is most of the time, I sit in silence. Like, I don't have music in the background. Sometimes I will, but most of the time it's pretty quiet. So I didn't have anything on at the time. And I had to go to the loo. So I go to the loo, come back out, and it's somehow quieter than it was when I went into the bathroom, and yet I didn't have anything on. So what's that about? So I go into the kitchen, and sure enough, the light on my stove was out. And that was the beginning that the Eastern Seaboard went out for 3 days. Do you remember?
Oh, wow. Okay. Right. Right. You turn it off. Turn it off moment coincided with the big
Bob actually gave me credit for it. He said, do you see how powerful you are, Bon Echo?
Yeah.
That was you. You did that.
Wow.
So, yeah. So it's like, and that's kind of where the sort of the magic of Bob and Marshall and, Joyce and Zappa and all of the fun that we had with Glow too, it's like, it'd be nice to have, a stage for that kind of thing. Doesn't have to be the same people, but it'd be nice to get them back,
Right. Yeah.
Like, did you ever hear anything from Just One?
Oh yeah, no.
Never, eh?
No. I didn't like make a big effort to try to find him or anything, but I never, saw anyone poke their head into the Bob sphere, Bob adjacent area.
Yeah,
saying,
no.
Hey, it's me. It's been a long time.
Because, because that's, like if I were to go back and say how my chapter started, it was the three of us, you, Just One, and me. And then Reimer came later. He was a little bit more, from my perspective, he'd had a little bit more time again with Bob because he'd already had him on his Ryerson radio show, I think. And so, so it's, and then it was after that. Okay, so I knew that Reimer existed. Oh, look at the kitty.
Yeah.
Hey, kitty.
He was snoozing, but he just woke up.
Oh, what a sweetheart.
I don't have curtains. Instead, I use social distancing signs that I took down from where they were polluting public space.
Love it. I love it. Yeah, it's funny how resourceful, you get sometimes. I've found that, in the sort of up and down, existence that I've had over the years, I've pared down my life a great deal too. So I can pretty much be anywhere like really fast, because I travel super light right now. But yeah, so I was just trying to think of the order of meeting everybody, because it was like I met kind of everybody all at once, but that's not how it looked to everybody,
Okay.
Because it was all kind of theater. And was it not really kind of I seem to remember maybe a couple of times before the McLuhan Festival when we walked around with Bob for scholarship, walking around U of T campus.
Yeah, he made some trip to Toronto where, it was like, it seemed almost like he came to Toronto just to meet us and talk to us, because it seemed, maybe he had other business or whatever, but
He did.
spend a fair amount of time just walking around U of T. I remember we were having like a seminar about his chart, basically, just asking questions about it. And he was like quizzing us about like, what do you think this means, kind of thing.
I
Yeah,
love
so that would have been, or maybe that was connected to the time that he was when he gave the speech at the McLuhan Coach House. I don't know if you were there or remember that.
Oh, I missed that one. That's right.
I think that might have been the fall of 2004.
Yes, well, the fall of 2004 would have been the McLuhan Festival itself,
Oh,
wasn't it?
okay.
But there were a few things before that, because I remember he came in to Toronto to be on Greg Duffel's show
Right.
as well, and that was the weekend that I met him for the first time.
Cool.
And I think we met him at Ryerson in like a little cafe somewhere in the underground.
Yeah, I think it was like the school cafeteria.
Yeah,
I can
maybe
remember
not
sitting
underground,
there
on Main.
with you and him and just one, and maybe it was just us four.
Yeah, I think it may have been. And but yeah, we got in a really good day.
Yeah.
That was a lot of good fun. That was my first time meeting all of you. So that's why, in terms of me, it was like that was the beginning, my entry point. And I was like, and I've told them a few times, because like at that point, his whole life story, his diaries, it's like, he's claiming that he's a pretty significant assassin, and there was actually a part of me that was like, am I really meeting somebody? You know what I mean? I was like so wrapped in the story of Bob, which I love every second of. So yeah, so it was great to kind of start there. And then by the time, which was probably about a year later, I would think, a year later, we were all in Toronto for the McLuhan Festival. So
Yeah.
I think it was just before all of that, or it may have been actually for that I finally got to meet Bob Marshall.
Okay, right.
And even though I knew about Steve Reimer and, seen him a little bit on the boards, I'd never met Steve Reimer. So Steve Reimer, I ended up being an accomplice to, Bob and Bob Marshall the kidnapping of Steve Reimer.
Yeah,
Just
he
by
got
going
the
along for the ride.
intensive introduction. I remember that was a hilarious story.
Oh my God, you're the best. And these are the stories that I would love to go over, And I figured that I'd start with you, because it was just like, okay, let's start right from the very beginning, Well,
I'm remembering now too, I wouldn't know about that story, but I certainly enjoyed hearing it back in the day. But I remember in thinking about the timeline here, there was earlier on in 2004, I don't know whether maybe it was the first time we met in person, but I remember on Leap Day, like February 29th, was a Sunday, and bizarrely my weirdo band project with Nigel, we were having our very first show on a Sunday morning at like it was like an after party. The idea being that people have been up all night partying. Like it was literally a Sunday morning that we were playing at this like club.
Were you on Eastern? Were you on Eastern Avenue?
Yeah.
So that was the day.
And Just One was there as well.
Yes.
And that might have been the first time we all met in person. I'm not sure. Or maybe we'd met before, but I remember that was like a really weird venue. It had this cool backyard area that sort of just turned into train tracks. Like,
yeah.
I remember sitting out there. I remember you had a tarot deck and you pulled out, maybe it was only from the Trumps, but like I got a cut card and the card I got was Temperance.
Oh,
and I was like, hey, 14.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so
And I think I was also like, and this weed I'm rolling, I bought at the bike courier place on Temperance Street. So there's a coincidence. But I'm pretty sure that was probably the deal.
yeah.
I remember, yeah, the Temperance Street bike courier place.
Yeah.
In those days.
You know, I have
that
to,
was a fun morning.
that was a lot of fun. I remember that. Yeah, and a lot of these times with Bob too, you know, they kind of blended and merged, you know, sometimes in the memory. But you know, it would be really nice to sort of incrementally bring everybody back and even see, like, I don't know, is Andrew Crystal still kicking around?
He's still kicking around. He's
Does
like
he ever
not
show
a
up?
fan of Ion,
No,
but
of course.
so you know he's not a participant in the show or whatever. Well, he might show up on the, who knows, Bob. I don't know how he and Bob might have, like, he might have decided at some point that Bob like went too far for him and he's not interested in talking to him anymore. Maybe,
Really?
I don't know, but I'm definitely curious. It's conceivable that Andrew Crystal might show up on, because like Bob just started a new show on the Achieve thing that doesn't have
Okay.
on Wednesday afternoons. So I could see Andrew
No,
Crystal coming
this
into
is
that
fun.
because he is still on his, you know, he's still like a McLuhan guy. And like I saw something just recently, I think it was Clinton. Do you know Clinton Ignatov? Or whether you know him in person, or have you seen his name online or whatever? He's a cool guy he's participated in some of the shows a few times over the past
Yeah,
couple of years.
the guy on Instagram.
No, not that's Jack. I think you're thinking of the
Oh,
basketball
okay.
player.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Clinton is lives in Ottawa, and he did a bunch of going to the archives and looking at stuff, and he's like trying to set up a new outlet for McLuhan studies that's not the dead end of the people that run the big Facebook page or whatever. So yeah, there's like the New Explorations magazine or web magazine that Clinton and a couple of people. Anyway, the point is Clinton is like trying to get a YouTube channel going. He's putting content there, doing interviews. Him and Jerry Fialka have done like a few co-interviews of people.
Ooh, nice.
And I'm pretty sure that one of the recent ones was Andrew Crystal, because it was only just within the past month I did see Andrew Crystal in some YouTube Zoom conversation, which was cool. It's good to see.
That's awesome, because it's kind of like, like the best times, I would have to say, or the most like electric times were definitely through the McLuhan Festival. You know, that festival changed my life, like, easily.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
And it's like from the glow session down in the basement of the Drake.
Yeah.
Like,
that was awesome.
it was insane, and I have that on DVD somewhere, and tape. So
yeah.
I have to retrieve all of that stuff as well. But that's okay. I got time. What else? It's like, it's kind of good to do this kind of stuff now. And I don't know. I don't know where we're heading future wise, and so I guess I don't want to give any energy to it, and so I'm without being nostalgic per se, because McLuhan warned of the dangers of that. I think that a retrieval is definitely in order, and like I said, I've talked to enough people. I'm not trying to recreate any sort of school of McLuhan by any stretch. I'm basically just trying to fill some time, reconnect with people, and not go crazy, talking about what makes sense to me in a world that doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like to get people like Andrew back, because his clarity, like a crystal. on McLuhan was phenomenal. It would be great to talk to Janine Marchessault,
Oh yeah.
It would be great to get like a little panel together. I'm kind of starting off slowly in terms, like I said, kind of, sort of tracking where it all began and kind of how interesting the journey is and how many, crazy ass characters there have been along the way.
Yeah.
No,
it's interesting because there seems like there's, there are these different of Bob. Uh-oh, I see I'm cutting out a little bit.
A little bit.
No, back in the present. Okay.
You're back
Yeah, there are these different pools of Bob fans from different times of his life.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting, the new fans versus old fans. Like, it was just like encountering someone like Bob Marshall for the first time, who was not in a honeymoon phase with Bob, been more of Dave Neufeld or whatever, like these older friends, Craig Duff, people who have a bit more of a sort of like, yeah, Bob, we all like your spiel, and none of us believe it. Like, whereas us new fans were a little bit more like, really? Did you really?
I get to record it, the workaround this time again. What we do for Bob, or no?
Oh, okay. There we go. All right. Well, this seems pretty good.
Oh, that's perfect. It's perfect. And it's funny because I just happened on your post you made 2 hours ago. Happy shitty Valentine's Day, everybody. I almost posted a tarot report being the anti-Valentine's Day career and show me the money reports.
Oh, cool. Nice.
There's a lot of people who complain on a lot of in the comments for other tarot readers, and they'll say, why do you guys always have to make it about love? Make it more about career and just life things. So I hope to fill a new niche. So yeah, but that's very cool. And I sent my most I would say ripe student for Bob, and I told her how excited I was that we were going to be having a chat, and so I sent her your Singing Sword channel.
Oh, cool.
She
nice.
loved it. Maybe we can set up like jam sessions for all of these very unique artists, because she's a poet. She's really amazing. She actually just finished a project with someone else that I'm going to be posting under a new forum that I'm going to build, that's going to be called, just like random awesome things,
Nice.
So at any rate, now that you're clear as a bell. So where were we? I think we were backtracking through the various individuals that we've met on this little path.
Right, and bringing it to, as a nexus, the McLuhan Festival. And what I was starting to ask upstairs was, so, that was transformative for me too, but you actually had Bob staying with you, right?
No.
Or just you were, okay. But you were intensively with him like all week.
I offered to be his chauffeur.
Okay.
I basically thought, I wanted as much access to Bob as I could get. So I was like, okay, Bob, I'm the chauffeur. I have the wheels,
Right.
And that's how that happened. So
right. I remember you expressing that you were kind of overwhelmed or spun by just how much time that by the end of it, you could hardly
Yeah, I can hardly think, for sure. I mean, you know, you can imagine, right? Just, well, I mean, you were there for a lot of it. Were you not?
Yeah.
Like, we went to almost like all the same things, I think.
I wasn't doing anything else at the time, really. Well, I mean, that's not entirely true. I had a job, but maybe with the weird scheduling, I might have just had that week off, because I think I went to everything. I went to all of the evening shows anyway.
Yeah.
Those Extreme McLuhan, they were called. It was like 3 or 4 of the nights they had it sort of a just free for all in the coach
Yeah.
house. That was great.
Yeah, those, I loved those so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it was, the thing about it was that, like, I felt so new to the whole thing. And maybe, no, it wasn't that time. I still felt new to it all, and I still kind of feel new to it, you know, like I didn't I didn't come to McLuhan as an academic, you know, like I was a mom, you know, who happened to have a fascination for politics and conspiracy theories, and that's how I just kind of dropped into it. Because, you know, even Eric McLuhan was like, so why are you here? Like,
Yeah.
how did you find your, if you're not, you know, in university and all this stuff? He was very curious about me. And I was just like, well, you know, after having worked in film and television industry behind the scenes, you know, and very much in the belly of the beast, it was like a lot of what Bob was talking about when I first hit him. And a lot of the first things that I hit with McLuhan was just stuff I knew from being inside of it for so long.
Right.
And I was actually very surprised in hindsight too, looking back on what school I did attend, post-secondary school I did attend, was like a year and a half of media arts at Sheridan College, you know, and then I basically, you know, jumped into the industry, and, you know, because you could do that back then. And so then I worked my way through, and it was just like, why didn't anybody teach McLuhan? I mean, maybe they would have taught it if I had stayed longer, but I don't think so. Like it
Right.
should have been part of the initial theory, and wasn't. So I was kind of, you know, I found it interesting that McLuhan hadn't really come into my awareness until I was in my mid-30s. You know,
Right.
that was it was like, wow, how, you know, how did this kind of escape my, you know,
Yeah,
view?
totally. I
So
mean,
that was my entry into it, was through that avenue thing. So it
yeah.
was, you know, it was very overwhelming for me to be around so many academics and kind of being in this weird place of, do I belong here? I'm oddly starstruck at the opportunities of who I'm meeting, you know, and really how important they are to, you know, the, you know, for lack of a better word, like the fabric of the intellectual community in this country. You know,
Yeah.
I felt really honored to have been able to participate in that, and the access I was getting, it was insane.
Yeah.
You know. So
Yeah.
I was overwhelmed by a lot of stuff, you know, and, you know, especially really just coming off of, you know, running after toddlers, you know, in my house.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so it really was a bit of a mind trip for me.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it was a special, like, festival, lots of stuff going on there just in the events, but in terms of the access, I mean, I remember, definitely a cherished memory for me, that you and I drove back from York University with Bob and Eric McLuhan.
I know, wasn't that like, I was just
What
like,
a moment in time.
thank you, universe, for this moment. It was just like, and you were there. You were there when I got
Aha.
the card
Right.
deck.
Yeah.
There it is, the do line, right? And like, does this not feel so appropriate to be retrieving now? You know?
Yeah.
And Because that day, what did I buy off of Eric? I bought the Executive is Dropout. I think a first or second edition. I can't remember. But you know,
there was only one.
There was only one. Okay, so there we go.
I
And
think they didn't even sell the first printing.
yeah, and he signed it for me, and I felt bad because I didn't think ahead of time to bring my copy of Laws of Media, which would have, of course, been more appropriate. But you know, but the really cool part about it too was that Eric told me that that I have like one of the rarer decks, because like they're collector's items now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've kept them in, you know, in really good condition. The box itself has taken a few bumps, but you know, I have the cards, but then I also have the instructions that come with them.
Nice. Yeah, I remember the instructions.
And
I had one of those.
You know, so you know, it's been a lot of fun to use them, you know, like tarot cards.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Really.
that was when that I bought them off of Eric, and you were there with me when I got this and the Executive is Dropout. So yeah. That was a good day.
I got those same items off of him a couple days later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very nice of him to do that. That was great.
It really was. I was like, oh my God, I felt like a little kid, you know, like, you know, a kid who collects baseball cards or something, you know. Now, was that the day that Bruce Powell? Because it would have been, right? Because it was Bruce's class, and that was a really good day.
That was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a great opportunity. It was because it was also, you know, it was seeing Eric McLuhan like teach a little class as well.
Yeah, I know.
As Bruce like kind of handed it off to him for the hour or for half an hour or whatever it was that because I guess that was his class, his McLuhan and Fry class.
Right.
So the idea was like, hey, we got a obviously important special guest coming in relevant to that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It really
That's
felt
great.
like,
and some other people, some other just eager hangers on who are these
groupies.
Nuts who are like
Groupies.
who are like groupies. Yeah, exactly. Oh, we're just like, can you take a photo of us? Yeah.
And it's like, what are you so excited about? Oh, Marshall McLuhan. It's like, what?
Yeah.
It, you know, no, it was.
Well, it's because it's exciting because, you know, like you were saying just about that there's this sense of like, man, why weren't they teaching that stuff? Why weren't they teaching McLuhan? That, you know, you can kind of imagine some ways that it's like maybe it's sometimes not the most you know, career oriented or whatever, but it's like there should be room for, you know, just filling out thoughtful things about the career that you're embarking on. But the point is, it gets to this idea that like what creates that crazy eagerness that we had and the fascination with Bob and that whole scene and everything is this idea, you know, this very real sense that McLuhan, what he was talking about was not just like interesting, but absolutely right, and like what makes the world go round, you know? So like the idea that you're, you know, this is like the cliche about why people fall for conspiracy theories or whatever, is that the feeling that you're in on the secret knowledge is powerful. But so it's weird with McLuhan because it's not a secret. He's a famous guy, but it's completely he's so much more famous than he is understood, you know? So that huge gap, it really is like what makes the world go round or something, like, you know, it's believable. I don't know, this whole idea of just Bob's basic point that he's like, hey, like the people who run the world use McLuhan to run the world. Like they use him as their operator's manual, basically the tetrad managers. So like, I just believed that idea right from the beginning, because that to me that matched what had been bothering me about the world when I was like seeing the way that things developed. I was like starting to perceive things, you know, trends flipping into their opposite or whatever, and how this was the ultimate problem faced by, you know, revolutionary movements, or that if you want to change the world, the problem is that you're going to eventually flip into your opposite. But I didn't have that tight, you know, that it's a law, someone discovered it, you know. To me, I was just struggling with perceiving something like that. And so in specifically that kind of context of the futility of trying to, you know, organize a revolution or something, that like these things flip into their opposites, you know.
So was your first encounters with McLuhan and his thoughts, is Bob your
No.
first? Okay.
No. I sort of lucked into just like a browsing in a bookstore and understanding media and thinking, oh, that sounds exactly like the book that I want to read. You know, I didn't know the name before I picked that up. And, you know, I was just very impressed by what I was reading. It took me a long time to get kind of really deep into it. I was sort of intimidated at first. I was like, well, this is like I was feeling like I was having a hard time following it the first time I tried reading it. And then when I came back to it, I was having a hard time staying with it because it was just so thought-provoking. I was so distracted. And yeah, so I was just like, the thing is, by the time I encountered Bob's existence or his writings, by the time I was led to that in 2002, I was already like, McLuhan was kind of my favorite, I guess. Like I probably would have still said Nietzsche was my favorite philosopher at that point, but McLuhan was like right up there. Okay. I loved McLuhan and I loved the Church of Subgenius. I thought Church of Subgenius was like the best. And I didn't know, you know, how to articulate it really. You know, I had certain leads or something, but I was still pretty much just in the early stages of not knowing how to explain my thoughts on these matters. But I definitely knew and felt that part of what made the Church of the Subgenius so right on compared to other kind of counterculture things was that they were more, not even McLuhan-esque, but like more kind of McLuhan informed, it seemed to me. Like they were more post-McLuhan than any other sort of thing.
Yeah, it's
and
kind
so
of
then,
amazing how people riff McLuhan and they don't even realize that they're doing it.
Yeah, because he really is getting to that core of like what artists are on about, you know. So like he's on about the same thing, so they end up being a ton of overlap. But so then that created a weird dissonance for me when I was, you know, to me it made sense that McLuhan and Subgenius would like go together. So it created dissonance eventually later when they seemed to be like, McLuhan. And I was like, I think that's more because you hate the guy who's always talking about McLuhan and not like, there's nothing wrong with McLuhan.
Right.
But just initially I was just astonished I was astonished that this, first of all, I was astonished at the idea like, oh, this is supposedly by Bob Dobbs and not, you know, because for me, like I had followed a link to something that I assumed was Subgenius related.
Okay.
But it was actually to his site. It was called McLuhan Institute back then, which now is McLuhan's thing. But it was the McLuhaninstitute.org, that one.
And wasn't it pretty dead by the time? Like really wasn't a whole lot of activity.
There was a chat room, and there was like a message board place with almost nothing going on. Like, yeah, I when I started posting there were like a couple of voices sporadically coming in and out. There was barely any attention on it. And so the first thing I read, I didn't plug, but just the idea of coming to this website and saying, wait a minute, essays by Bob Dobbs, not, you know, because they always talk about him. And to me, that was part of the whole, you know, that they had sort of figured it out in the sense that like the guru game doesn't work when you have it, when you're pointing at yourself you're just asking for doom. That like, no, they figured out you got to just always be pointing at, no, it's what that guy said, but then that guy doesn't exist, so he can never disappoint anyone, right? You just build up the legend of the good stuff he said. And so part of that whole thing, like the whole point is that they only ever, he's only ever quoted, and you don't get the direct thing from him or something. So anyway, but yeah, so I was astonished by that, but I was puzzled by that. I'm like, wait, this is Bob Dobbs, but like what really put the weird spin on it right away was it was immediately apparent that this real Bob Dobbs that I'm puzzled over is all about McLuhan. And so like, to me, that just makes perfect sense. Like, of course, if there was a real Bob Dobbs, he would be all about McLuhan, because that just makes perfect sense. Like, so, that was like, I was doomed from the beginning to be very susceptible to buying his line about being like the real J.R. Bob Dobbs, because, that's what I would have expected the real J.R. Bob Dobbs to, that like his like secret formula for creating the Churches of Genius was, yeah, that fucking McLuhan, like, yeah.
I have to say that some of the funniest stuff that went down in those early days was through those little mini wars that would happen between our little posse and the Churches of Genius. Yeah. Oh my God, they called us the sock puppets, I think, didn't they?
Yeah, they were. There seemed to be a period where they really had to get over. There was a very real disbelief that Bob had any actual fans. Like, they didn't seem to be joking at first. Like, they were like, oh, here you are in another, fake account that you created to pretend you have a fan.
I know.
Or they thought that he like hired someone to pretend to be a fan, That like, it took them a while to accept, like, no, there are these, like, maybe they're crazy as hell and stupid or something, but there are these people in Toronto that are big fucking fans of this guy. They're here. They're having fun. They like it when we insult them for some reason. So I guess they're not going away.
Because it's like, it was like, I think the way that it kind of rolled in was, like, because like I said, I came onto the message board, and I'm going, ooh, all these delicious details of all of the different stories that, that it's too much for me to listen to the Lenny Bloom show, because it's given me like heart palpitations to listen to him. So I'll just stay with the, with the discussion board and talk. Mm-hmm. And then Bob would come in, and I don't know, like he, and he would talk about how much the Church of the Subgenius don't believe that he is the second coming.
Yeah.
No, come on, I'll show you. That was kind of the thing. Bob's like, you got to come over to Old Sack. You got to come over to Old Slack.
Yeah.
Because it was funny. Oh my God, I was killing myself. Like the various characters, and it wasn't even Stang that I saw post against him too much, but
because there are lots of characters there, and they
so
have different ways of approaching the whole thing, or different flavors of orneriness or pissed off. Some were more pissed off than others. Well, there are some of the people who are these sort of like, very like thunderous menace writers. They try to be as like, as intimidating as possible or something, or as just to express their hate, some people are like severe. And
like, is it true that a bunch of them are like stand-up guys?
Oh, I'm sure there's a ton of amateur stand-ups, at least, like, people have tried it. Like, there's, I mean,
they sound, and sometimes their humor did kind of come off as like, yeah, this would be the kind of backroom humor at a stand-up club. Right. That was kind of, how it felt, the jokes that were flying around, because nothing was sacred there. Nothing.
Yeah, no.
So yeah, that was, I really saw the bounds of, black humor on that. on that.
Yeah, and it was
Sure.
really, I mean, you know, it's just strange in retrospect because whatever it was that Bob was doing on that forum, and you know, depending on the whatever is the reality behind his various claims, you know, changes how it was for him. But in terms of appreciating what he was doing on there, it was very kind of like maybe hard to describe or something, like, or that it was considered, you know, the subgenii, like they were very confident speaking about it as if, you know, like there is obviously no reasonable kind of way to appreciate this, like that, like if you dig what he's doing, there's something wrong with it, you know? But like, and specifically not just the idea of like, oh, if you think there's something interesting about McLuhan or whatever, but in the sense of like appreciating his gadfly campaign against them, you know, like literally just that friction cycle. That back then it seemed like, you know, they reacted to it as if it was like just really mysterious and repellent how you could find some kind of strong value in that. Whereas these days it's like, you know, I feel like we didn't have the word troll back then or something, but that just that the
no, I think they called
something about the value of what he was doing there, or the enjoyability of what he was doing there is much, much more obvious these days than it was at the time, apparently.
I found too that that as was the case, no matter what the environment, it was always fun to watch the effects of Bob.
Yeah.
You know, much in the same way that, you know, that McLuhan had suggested that people take their own chair to the movies and instead of watching the screen, watch the audience, you know?
Right.
That was kind of the fun, you know, the fun little games that I felt we were playing, you know, and you know, which, you know, it'll be fun. Like I'd love to do one of these with Steve and Bob Marshall and have them talk about how that night went down, you know, because it was like that was kind of the stuff that, you know, to watch the effect of Bob and Bob Marshall, especially too, on Steve in that initial meeting was, you know, I felt that effect over there, and you know, and Bob would note that women, you know, coming in contact with him would often giggle, you know, whereas men, you know, and I would watch that too, depending on the circumstance, you know, that there were a lot of men who just got extremely agitated with anything he said, you know, and it was uncanny to watch sometimes. And so watching the effects of Bob, you know, has been a fun pastime for me, you know. And I don't know, is it my imagination, or is he especially aggressive lately?
Oh, probably. I mean,
it feels different than it did before.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. It's hard for me to evaluate whether it's more or less than recently or something. But I think that it's been sort of part of his repertoire pretty consistently on the show over the years is to be willing to express like some impatience or something with people, and you know, be
thuggery.
And push back against Ion too sometimes. Like they sort of pick at each other a little bit in ways that are like, it's just funny it's always funny to hear Bob encouraging people to sort of like just trying to just urge people to be more demanding of Ion. Like,
no, tell him to answer your
always
question.
Like people, you know, they ask a question and he gives an answer that is clearly not satisfying to them, and they're like, oh, okay, I'll think about that. And he's like, no, demand that he clarify. You know, I like that.
Or demand that he answer at all. Because, you know,
Yeah.
for like, for a couple of times that I tuned in, you know, it was like, you know, Ion just wasn't responding,
Yeah.
you know, and it was like, this is very interesting, you know, and, you know, and it's like, and it's weird. I just find it's very weird because at times I know exactly why Ion is silent.
Yeah.
And and I, you know, and I'm like, yeah, I probably would be too. Like, you know, like but it's interesting. It's like I say, like I don't like I love that you don't have to buy into Ion, you know what I mean? Like I love how often Ion will reiterate, I don't give a shit what you think, you know,
Yeah.
like and it's like it's perfect. And you know, because that's kind of you know what I know I've been sort of building towards for a long time, especially with Age of Aquarius, because Aquarian stuff is like healthy detachment. So, you know, that's one of the things that I think is kind of Aquarian about the whole Ion stuff is there is so much detachment. You know, that I'm intuiting. I may not be up on all of the details and stuff, but you want to know something? Did you listen to the whole show last night?
No, no. I listened to a bunch of it, but I missed a couple of the early hours, and then I was off to bed by 5 anywhere, 4 something. So
Yeah, I usually can't survive past about 1 or 2.
yeah.
Just because of my own, you know, sleeping schedule and so on. And sometimes I find that my mind will trail off, like, and I'm not following it.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going, well,
No,
why am I listening?
Yeah, it's hard to pay attention to that much. And plus the topic changes so much, sometimes are just of less interest.
And then Bob will get all like, no, 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 and start yelling at somebody. And I just like, you know what, I'm done. No, I'm good. But you know, it's like, what was it that, oh, it's always in just the little things that like Ion will slip in between stuff, and it's like you barely hear it sometimes, and it's not even part of the conversation, but it'll be everything. And it sent me on quite the little journey last night. And I was like, you guys go play over there. One word triggered me into a whole other thing. I'll send you the link for what I watched as a result of this. But
Yeah,
it's
neat.
like Ion said something about like just you wait till Megiddo,
Oh yeah, right.
right?
Armageddon.
But Megiddo, you know, like the whole like, cause like the like the video that I landed on that was just rich, so rich with stuff, was hitting the Talmud, Kabbalistic ritual mysticism and whatnot. It was unbelievable what like exploded as a result of Ion just saying that one little thing for me. You know, I ended up watching him like 3 different videos, and
Cool.
you know, and found this channel of this guy who's all about I think it was called Esoterica, possibly even was the YouTube channel. But it was, oh man, it was brilliant, you know. And it threw back, so then Xenochrony started happening, of course, right? I forgot this part. The Xenochrony stuff started happening, and it was the keys, you know, the circle-y thing video that talks about all the keys.
Yeah, okay, the angel diagram thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that video, which is by far, that's my absolute favorite Bob video.
Yeah, it's cool.
Do you have any idea who made that? Because whoever made it was brilliant.
I did know. It's not coming to mind right now.
It's so well done. And it's like I watch it over and over and over again, and I still don't know what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
You know, but I've always been fascinated, you know, and then it got me into the whole Solomon thing. you know, and which then circles back to Freemasons, right? You know, because the Freemasons apparently, you know, they think they know where all of Solomon's stuff is buried,
Right.
right? So,
I have the treasure map.
right? And then that makes me think of a while back, I know it was after Bob, but I was actually gonna put together a proposal for a TV show on Oak Island.
Nice.
Yeah, because there was some stuff that actually, there's a bit of a triangulation between astrology, Oak Island, and Rosslyn Chapel. There are links between Rosslyn Chapel and Oak Island, and I was then that was what was like, oh wow, look at the connection there, you know. And I was gonna pull some stuff together on that, because that's, you know, that's always been fascinating to me. And I did end up going to Rosslyn Chapel, which was really something else to actually be inside, you know.
Nice.
Yeah, that was yeah, really amazing, you know. And to think, you know, of all the Masons, you know, who would be like so delighted to be me.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I have a replica actually of the apprentice pillar right here.
Oh wow, okay, cool. Nice.
See, so it's twisted.
Pretty.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah. But yeah, it and it would be nice to, you know, it's like, you know, as I retrieve McLuhan, it would be nice to get more in touch with the esoteric side of what McLuhan, you know, got into.
Right. Yeah.
Do you know anything about his history in that regard?
Just what I've read from McLuhan of you know, some of the older stuff that he wrote about where he was sort of in his kind of conspiracy theorist phase, talking about where he was analyzing the worldview of the kind of what he identified with as the sort of enemy or something. The you know, I guess he associated it with a kind of a either like a Gnosticism or a paganism or a space school rather than time school or something. Like he talked about vertical symbolism versus horizontal symbolism or something. And
interesting. Okay.
And he wrote, there was this thing that Bob apparently, you know, first published in the Paranoia magazine interview.
Mm-hmm.
That was in, I think, 2007 that came out. I remember that was kind of an exciting time. That's like that bought, he was on the cover.
Right.
On the cover of the magazine, and there's this awesome interview. And on the web version, there was like, in the magazine had the interview, and on the web had that interview and then a whole like appendix where Bob just like offered up and Joan published on her website anyway. I don't know about permission, maybe without permission. This previously unpublished awesome early book review by McLuhan that was talking all about this. And you know, like he was talking about it as like a secret church of the Antichrist and all this. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it just depends what you mean by esoteric, I guess. There's just so many different flavors of that, and that there's a lot of different ways to deal with it. I still have to, one thing I've been meaning to get around to for many years, at least 10 years, I've been meaning to get around to, it doesn't seem like it like I should write this thing, but I don't know about writing it. I just need to like record a conversation about it at some point. The Carl Jung's book Flying Saucers has this chapter of, one of the chapters is dreams about flying saucers. He presents, I think, 7 dreams that feature a flying saucer, and in various ways, and he analyzes them. And when I read this, I was amazed at how, I'm like, you need, forget Jung, you need Marshall McLuhan interpreting these dreams as being like visions of the media environment. Like the idea of the, that Jung talked about the flying saucer as being a kind of a vision of the, like the mirage of your unified soul, or the collective soul even.
Mhm.
But, the way that they present, or when they present this way, as technological objects of some kind, like still having a kind of there's an uncanny sort of psychic level going on, but the apparent content is like, I saw this craft in the sky or something, right? That like the technological appearance of these visions is also meaningful. And anyway, particularly the dreams in Jung's Flying Saucers seem to me like to be very, that like McLuhanism, general McLuhanism can really analyze these. They plug into McLuhan very well, I think. So like, yeah, I keep meaning to want to do this. Well, I don't have a copy of that book. That's one thing. I keep looking for that book used, but it's not very commonly found. It's not one that people can get rid of a lot because it's so good. But yeah. Anyway, one of these days I'm gonna come across a cheap copy of Jung's Flying Saucers, and I'm gonna be like, Bob, you gotta carve me out an hour so I can rant about this.
Right? Do I believe Bob? Do I believe him? I don't think I need to believe him. I think it's more like I'm miming him though. I mime him a lot. Yeah, and I find that the miming is actually a very good tool, like internally, just to mime him as an experiment.
Cool.
Has gotten me through a lot of different tricky situations, and and I found also too that a lot of the information that Bob provided, even though it's like a lot of it maybe wasn't good news, it still validated my instincts. And right. I don't think that there's enough information out there for any of us to feel anything that's validated, because media is off the hook right now. It feels like, did you ever see the movie Coraline?
Oh yeah.
That's what it feels like to me.
Totally.
Like everybody's got buttons instead of eyes.
Yeah, no, it's true. They do. Yeah. Yeah, so, they're weird doll people. And it's a creepy world where something's missing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can't. It's hard to believe that people can bring themselves to believe it. But then, I remember that it's like, yeah, it's just that boiling frog thing. It's like, if you soak your head in it every day, it seems to have that continuity of, it gets you from day to day. It must be coherent or something. But it's like, if you pull your head out of that for a significant amount of time and then look back at it, it's fucking horrifyingly disjointed and doesn't add up and is like flagrantly manipulative, and like there's just red flags all over that shit. And it looks like these days it looks a lot more like what it is. Like it's less sneaky or something. Like it's less presentable and more just nakedly just like vehement and like super aggressive spin on everything. And people are just like, well, that's just reality. Like,
I know.
Like, yeah, I keep being surprised that people can normalize that, but it's not. It's the other way around. They normalize it by seeing it every day. It normalizes them. Like, it defines what's normal if you make it your normal accompaniment to reality, you know, like, yeah, I don't know, just the thing about just the whole, like, it's really just come down to that thing where, you know, in the past, it's just amazing with the COVID thing, like, it really has just come to, it's this homeopathic, you know, conspiracy, like,
Yes.
where it's like in the past there would be some giant thing that would happen, and then, you know, you'd look in, there would be all these rabbit holes to seeing it in a different way or something, and but there was still like a thing that happened and then a kind of a backstory to it. But like with this COVID thing, it's like you really, like, there's nothing going on unless you're watching TV every day. Otherwise, you're just like, if you're not, like, it only gets by on the fact that every day people are reminded that the top story is how are we doing on that thing, right?
Yes.
If it wasn't for those reminders, there's nothing going on. Well, what's going on is that you just like, oh, people are insane now. People are, I mean, I don't, insane is such a, you know, low definition and contentious word, but people are, to try to be more specific or something, like, people have gone into a, like, are having a severe what about Bob psychotic break,
Yeah.
you know, where they think that that they can't go outside because of germs or something. Like, what happened, you know? But like, it's only, you would never, like, the point is just this basic sort of Baudrillard-y thing where it's like, on when they talk about COVID on TV, that's where the story comes from. It's not, they're not reporting on a reality, they're creating it by the reporting, you know?
Exactly.
This is like it, I don't know, it's just, it just seems like it's a little bit like there were buildings in Manhattan that then weren't there anymore, and something happened to them, you know? And like, what they said happened to them, that's not what happened to them. We're not totally sure what did happen to them, but it wasn't what they said. But there was some real thing that they misreported on.
Yes.
In this case, there's no thing.
I
There's
know.
just misreporting. It's
And
really weird.
And it's like, because, you know, in terms of, like, you know, clarifying too, just like the finer points of it, it's like, and the subtleties of how it's affecting people. It's like, okay, I'm a fairly solitary person anyway, you know, like I enjoy spending a lot of time alone.
Yeah.
This has been a little excessive for sure, but I'm also noticing that there's a lot of other people who like to live that way. So, and then there's also like families who are very insulated. So to a lot of people, it's like they're sort of perfect dynamics.
Yeah.
You know, this is where it's like, you know, COVID giveth and COVID taketh away. You
Right.
know? So it's like, so there are some people who have been anesthetized by getting what they wanted.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, or it's a big relief that just the weekly anxiety of like doing something on the weekend, or else being like a, you know, antisocial and or loser who doesn't have something to do on the weekend or something, like, you know, a lot of people are caught up in that anxiety cycle of a social status thing, and then
Well,
now
and
they're
then
relieved of that. They don't have to worry about that. We all have a great excuse to not be out and trying to flirt or something, you know?
or, you know, or it's like even just getting fresh air. It's like people don't know if they can go for a walk by themselves. You know, it's like once in a week, if you took a walk around the block, would that be like, seriously? You know what I mean? It's like, if it was for your sanity, if it was for your health, and you haven't seen a soul, you know, it's like, if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it? You know
Yeah,
what
no,
I'm saying?
you'd have to be crazy to even suspect that there was anything wrong with that. But
But it's like,
here we are.
you know, like that we're even having to negotiate these kinds of things is just like, and like you say, it's like that there's been a normalcy that's kind of been draped over these kinds of ponderings that is so not normal and not
Right.
natural. And the propaganda, like you say, is like, it's not even shady.
Yeah.
It's just right out there. And yeah, I mean, there's so many questions, but I don't know. I feel like, I'm feeling like those of us who, it's like, the whole idea, once you're awake, you can't go back to sleep again, right?
Yeah.
And, and then you think a dude in the Matrix who actually made the deal to go back,
Right.
And so it's like, we're all sort of in this bizarre interval between Neo and Smith.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of that, like, and what, what I know, even just by looking at the astrology, whether or not it's legit or not, the patterns are unmistakable. And, I'm kind of hoping that the folks who are, like, once you've seen it, you can't unseen it. It's like, maybe, maybe there's a way to make a plan, that isn't necessarily like insurrection or, of a threat to anyone, but to actually start a dialogue about, the sort of benefits that you can get from looking at everything in the ways that McLuhan had suggested that we take, that we probe things, and the way that Bob has taken that even further. And because, like, where's the free energy, Bob? Like, if I could get the little battery box that he's been promising us for, over a decade, then it wouldn't be an issue,
Yeah.
Although I have to say that when all this COVID started happening, I knew of a few people who were, right on the edge of being off the grid. And it pulled them back in.
Interesting.
So,
really? I would have thought, it would be a really great time to be ready to be off the grid.
Yeah, no, that it's not as easy to be off the grid as it used to be.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's like, I think that our thinking around, whatever sort of dilemmas about being trapped right now, we have to get on that gyroscope you used to talk about.
Right.
Because
I'm remembering that about being able to lean very far, lean however far in any direction without actually tumbling in that direction.
Yeah.
That the gyroscope is able to do. Yeah.
I mean, is Bob the gyroscope?
Yeah. I mean, it's bizarre. I don't know. It's bizarre about Bob. Yeah, it's just weird because, like, man, I mean, that Xenochrony thing, it was like he, in a kind of a worst case scenario, that being that he's like a creative liar.
Right.
The worst case scenario, he like figured out how to kind of weaponize synchronicity so that his synchronicities were, evidence of his unique position relative to the culture, like, rather than just being like, hey, I'm I'm a real live wire with a high voltage, and so
I'm
I
a
get,
dark
get
soul.
big sparks on the synchronicity realm. But like it was like, no, see, that's like the proof. Like they made the Matrix movie about me, and it's like, well, okay, maybe they did have him in mind, or partially, maybe he was in the mix when they were writing that movie, and that explains the things that would seem to indicate that. Or maybe it's just synchronicity because, you know, artists talking about the same thing have some overlap in their visions, right? And synchronicity, you get, there are real amazing coincidences that happen, but you can take an amazing coincidence and look at it as if it's by design or something, or as if it's like a sign that means something kind of direct, which in the case of some of these Dobbs Xenochronies or whatever would seem to be that he's like, you know, the stuff he claims about himself is like less crazy than it sounds or something. Like, you know, it's like, yeah, why do you think the movie about the guy who sort of fell ass backwards into the presidency, which started, his presidential campaign started as a joke, and then he ended up as president? Like, why do you think that character's name is Dobbs? Because that's me, folks, because it's about me, you know? That it's like, is it really just that he had such poise that like once he saw a synchronicity emerge, he would immediately exploit it or something? Like, and get and move pat, like straight face it, like not act impressed by it or surprised by it, and just act like, of course that's happening because it means this, you know? That it's like, at the very least, that's a creative way of lying, you know? And he really, to me, it always just tripped me out that I'm like, you know, I would try to think the worst of him, and the worst I could possibly come up with is that he has developed this lying system which synchronicity likes and plays into. Like the real luck of the real world keeps throwing him bones. So I'm like, you know, either, you know, his style of lying is like popular with like the gods, or else maybe there really is something to what he's talking about his claims about himself, like, you know, in the sense that like, yeah, those people who wrote those scripts that generated the coincidence about me, like, yeah, they're part of the gang that tried to kill me. That's why they're gang stalking me. You know, it's like, wow, well, maybe that is true. Or maybe you're just weaponizing coincidences. But either way, food for thought.
Here's the thing. It's a combination for me. It's a combination of a couple of things. And the first thing is an anecdote about a minister in a sermon one day, and I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting way to look at it, like in terms of, you know, the divinity, the esoteric divinity of the actual man of Christ, you know, Jesus, you know, like when he was cornered on that question in terms of his faith, because that happens in churches. People compete even with their faith. It's pretty interesting. Yeah. So he said that he believed that Christ saw the job description. and stepped into it. Yeah. And so I think it's a little bit of that, but then it's also a bit of Forrest Gump.
Right. You know? Right.
And then I ended up in Ottawa. What a huge disappointment that was. I don't know if you know.
I like Ottawa, but
I used to too, but I don't think I want to live there anymore. No, thank you. No, thank you. So, you know, it was kind of fun to trip around, and I was kind of, you know, really juiced on the idea of getting access to, you know, McLuhan's archives and playing around with that, but it wasn't meant to be, so I let it go. But yeah, like in terms of Bob, yeah, I kind of watch his example. You know, as opposed to whether he's right or telling the truth or any of those things, you know what I mean? It's just, it's kind of you know, he did surrender to synchronicity in his own ways, and so he's lived this kind of charmed life by, I don't know, you know, by just being him in that sort of, you know, and the number of different hats that he wears. But yeah, I have to say that that my favorite version of Bob was those huddles that were happening at the McLuhan Festival with remember that there was a paper that was being read in the afternoon, and huddles like with Andrew Crystal and Bob and and man, did they ever, like, they were like, okay, now's the time for the intellectual thuggery.
Yeah.
And I've been writing, you know, different versions of like disclaimers that I could put on if I get the panel of Bob on here, and everybody just, you know, whatever, you know, and I'll have the intellectual thuggery theater disclaimer, you know, like it's like, don't take anything too, you know, like you gotta be cool when you listen to these people talk, you know, not jump to any conclusions.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just reminded of when you're saying, you know, just about Bob's just example, never mind about, you know, leaving aside what is the answer or something. That just his example that, you know, there's a lot of wisdom in what he would say about that. Like the trick is that, like his trick, he would say, was that he doesn't take it personally or something with the coincidences, that like he'll like eagerly talk about that. Like he's eager to use them to like help people understand that he is what's going on. But he claims that anyway, that personally he doesn't identify with them, right? He sees them as kind of hostile almost. Like they're useful, but that it's like a danger, you know? To
and
like
that's where the
identify that it's part of the it's not talking to you thing. No, it's not. It might look like me, but it's not talking to me. Just because it resembles me, it's not actually addressed to me. So that's an interesting wisdom I've tried to, and I've sometimes really failed. But in retrospect, because I've, you know, my like synchronicity journey has definitely, you know, that has never petered out.
No, me neither.
Only got more and more impressive, like to the point where the stuff that blew my mind back in the day when we were hanging out, sometimes, you know, sometimes I look back on that, I'm like, oh, how quaint that was, like how quaint that I found that mind-blowing back then compared to what I've dealt with in the past couple of years. Like, woo,
right?
You know, it is incredible. But so yeah, like I've often in retrospect, when I'm sort of in the like recovery phase from some extreme anomalous pattern emergence, you know, I'll often be able to perceive, especially in retrospect, that, you know, the less I identified with it, the better or something. That like, even as like, because it's thrilling or something to it's thrilling to really like take it to heart when an incredible coincidence, either just like the magic timing happens to you, or something out in the world seems to like point at you with like public data or something in a weird way, or point at something related to you, that it's like there's like a thrill or a pleasure in taking it to heart, but that's also like dangerous psychologically, and you know, that's, that's like the juicy piece of meat in that McLuhan talked about, that like the content of the medium is the juicy piece of meat that the burglar uses to distract the watchdog of the mind, or something.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Medium of synchronicity is the message, right? Not that particular, not the particular content of the thing that happened to you or something. That like,
yeah.
It's like there's definitely a lot of wisdom in Bob's whole posture and reaction to his attitude towards coincidence that way. Is really, there's a lot in there.
Well, yeah, because he would respond to it differently at different times. I noticed that because I was all about the magic, right? You know, it's like, ooh, another word to call, you know, a cool word for magic. Okay, this will be fun. And you know, but it was like there were times when he would talk about Xenochrony and say, no, like he would run away from it. There were even times when he said that he ran from it because it was like, no, you know, like I'm not engaging with you, you know, it was like, and then there were other times when yes, he saw it as validation for any number of his theories or things that he was, you know, trying to point out to people. And then, you know, but then there were other times when he found it fun, just like the rest of us, you know, and I think that it can be a very good high vibe tool, you know, if you, like you say, don't take it too much to heart, you know, think of it as just sort of, you know, bells, you know, an extra sound effect on something,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
Is a pring, you know, like when you would, is that before your time? There were these books that you, with a record, yeah, vinyl. Jesus, I'm old. I'm just realizing that these days, you know, because it's like I lived at a time, you know, I lived across the analog digital border, you know, professionally and personally. So it's amazing the kinds of things, you know. And then to think too that, you know, like that McLuhan was saying things that only we can understand now, but it was on kinescope. He was saying it on kinescope, man. It's insane.
Yeah. I'm often still baffled by McLuhan that way, just how much he was able to see, how much more obvious it is now. Some of the stuff he talked about, like, and it's interesting, some of the stuff that took kind of longer than he thought maybe to become obvious. Like he at least seemed to talk about like, oh well, this is right around the corner, and like I guess it seemed obvious to him that that's where things were headed, and like he maybe didn't expect it to take kind of 40 years or something to really become what he was saying, rather than 10 or 15. But you know, but yeah, there's a lot of the mute, like the fact, like this thing that, particularly this thing that's happened in just the last few years, where after, you know, there were some rumblings of dissatisfaction with this tradition for a while, but then in the last few years it's really become this openly believed thing that value what we used to call the values of like objectivity, that's it's not just that that's in trouble. Like for a while there was like, oh, it's hard to maintain, like there's a crisis of objectivity or something. You know, nowadays people have decided that that's a bad thing, that like trying for objectivity is toxic and bad,
I
and will lead
know.
to bad outcomes, and that we should never have, or I don't know about we should never, but that we need to be less like that, as like a matter of media ecology or something. That people have come to this idea that that's bad media ecology now. Like present both sides. Like people are like, no, there is no both sides. There's
the one side.
Is, and the assholes who don't get it, right? And why were we presenting the asshole side this whole time? That's the main problem with our culture, is that we gave the assholes all this airtime. That's like, it's weird. It's like, to me, that's a very like strong McLuhan-y thing, that it's like, you know, the kinds of things when he was delivering these kind of bad news to people, and they're like, what do you mean literacy is on the way out? And it's like, guys, get ready for it. Like, literacy is on the way out. Like, your values that you consider your values, bye. Like, they're like, how they are now is the most they're ever going to be in your life. So, you know, like, trust, like, you know, guys, I'm warning you, in the future, the people won't even know what the hell you're saying when you're like, well, oh, the virtue of objectivity. Like in the future, people will be like, virtue? Are you joking? That's not a virtue. I don't understand that value at all. It's not intuitive to me even a little bit. I grew up in a different world, you know? That's like, yeah, it's really that way. He was fucking totally right. People that are growing up with where visual values are, you know, de-emphasized, they hate those literate values. They don't like them at all. They don't see them as virtues at all or valuable. They see them as very destructive, which is, it's like, wow, yeah. And I can see their point, but they're also hypnotized by their media environment. So.
Exactly. And this is kind of the deal, you know, like this is why I kind of feel like we need McLuhan knowledge and, you know, insight now more than ever.
Yeah.
You know, because I am, you know, I'm very conscious of the kind of dialogue that I have with people, because people don't, like, genuinely don't understand when I tell them that I have no politics.
Yeah.
They don't understand it. And because it's unimaginable in the paradigm that they're attached to. And I get it. But, you know, it's like for someone who, you know, it's then it becomes, you know, I'm a heretic.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, you know, one of the beautiful things that I was so happy about when I found McLuhan was that it was like, oh my God, a lexicon of non-judgmental language.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
That was the appeal for me instantly. It was just like, oh my God, I've been searching for this for a very long time. How to speak about everything without having an opinion.
And to me, that comes down to this idea of like Slack as well, and of, you know, like it's a very important thing with the Church of the Subgenius, right? One of their great lines. That's like, you know, to me, it's like it's one of those lines from them that belongs up there with like whatever any, you know, famous philosopher ever said. They're like, you don't need answers, you need excuses. And it's like, to me, that's one of the wonderful things about McLuhan is that he offers excuses. You know, that it's like it's like you can get very judgmental, a bit like that situation I was describing about people, you know, they are hostile to literate values these days, values of objectivity and that sort of like civic neutrality, as we think of like the civic space as the sort of neutral space, that like those values, they're hostile to them now. You know, it could be easy to be very judgmental about that and to think that there's something wrong with them, or that there's something wrong with the way they were educated, something malicious. Like it must have been obvious, like those are good values. Like the only way these people could possibly not understand those values is if they were, you know, deliberately miseducated, or if they are, they're like antisocial people or something. You know, that they're just bad people. They just want to be part of a tribal gang that commits violence or something.
Yeah.
That hypes itself up, psychs itself up to attack. And so it's easy to get very judgmental about it. It's easy to get very despairing about it. And for like, even if he's wrong, just the fact that McLuhan is offering a possible explanation that's like kind of not anybody's fault is
exactly.
It really just, it creates a breathing room in the conversation. He's like, no, you grew up with this electronic media. That's why you think that. It's not because it's not because you're bad, or like maybe someone, you know, probably, you know, if you get down to it with McLuhan and into like a long conversation over some wine or something, you'd probably go on and on about how people are being deliberately miseducated. But, you know,
but we don't have to go there. We can just
that he's offering a possible excuse. Maybe there's no malice involved.
Exactly.
Maybe people are just hypnotized by their media, right?
Exactly. And that's kind of, you know, that's why I found it, you know, him so valuable just from that one perspective, so much good could come from that if people, you know, like that. It's like, no, you don't have to give up your favorite TV shows. No, you don't have to give up your movies. You don't have to stop talking on the telephone. None of those things you have to do. But you have to ask yourself how much this stuff has control over the way you think and view the world.
Yeah.
Take a day, you know? Just start with one day to say, is it possible that I have an accurate perspective on the world? And if I don't have, is that a problem? And does it need to be addressed? Just, you know, these are the, I think, are reasonable conversations for people to have, you know. I wanted to ask you something. I saw Andrew McLuhan on you invited me to your group.
Yeah.
So Andrew, where is he in the family tree?
That's Eric's son.
Eric's son. Wow.
Yeah.
So how do you know Andrew?
He's the firstborn of the firstborn, I guess.
He's the firstborn of the first.
He would be the reigning king if McLuhan had been king. So yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, that's a good question. When did I first encounter Andrew McLuhan? I guess probably on just like the Marshall McLuhan Facebook group, and then just hearing that. For a while there, I was making fairly regular trips to the at the U of T. They have like what they call McLuhan's working library, that like were his books and that he had written like annotations in the margins and stuff.
Yeah,
some of them
Bob's
are really
got
cool.
Bob's got one I want. He's got the Joseph Campbell skeleton keys to Finnegan's Wake with all the Marshall's notes on it.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, there's a lot of stuff there at this, at the Rare Book Library at U of T there. And I had been semi-regularly going and looking at some stuff. And then, you know, Bob would give me some time on the show to report my findings. And about like, you know, McLuhan made this note about this line in a book or whatever. And so I guess my first inkling of Andrew McLuhan was just hearing that, you know, he had organized this library. He had like done the inventory, you know, and he had basically prepared it for them to take. Like they didn't, he wasn't like, I don't know, they're in the barn, go get them. You do your library curation thing. You know, he did the inventorying. And so that was cool. But also, yeah, I guess I saw, this is a good question, because I'm now realizing, like, I don't know when I was first made aware that, like, you know, McLuhan III is, you know, also involved in the scene here, and
Nice.
And that he's like a cool guy. You know, he like used to play in a punk band and stuff, and he likes Sub Genius.
Of course he did. Of course he did.
He also is just like, you know, I like the, you know, because I really liked Eric McLuhan, but I also really like Bob, and I understood that there was like friction between them, and that like we were especially lucky to get to witness like a friendly interaction between those two, because there were some unfriendly interactions between those two over the years. And Eric McLuhan didn't necessarily think that Bob was like, it's like, yeah, it's great if he's like inspiring some new people to get into McLuhan, but doesn't really approve of the way he talks about it. Anyway, so Andrew McLuhan is a little bit more like, I don't know, he also is like obviously annoyed by Bob or something, but like liberties that Bob's take, but he's also much more appreciative of and respectful of Bob's comprehensive knowledge of McLuhan than most of the other kind of like mainstream McLuhan people that are too old.
I mean, Bob's delivery.
Really get it.
Bob's delivery is challenging for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and a lot of people are just repelled, just find the whole ion thing repellent, and even if that, like, they don't even care if they're good vitamins, just like the way he's selling them is unseemly or whatever, and you know, that's not anything they want to be associated with. It's like, it's even if it is good stuff, it's like it's snake oil because it's being sold in a snake oily way or something. It's almost like this dude, like,
Yeah, it's so funny because, like, you know, again, like, you know, I'm afforded the luxury of not being a part of this community at all.
yeah.
And just finding all of them very, very equal in terms of fascination, insight, and all of that, you know, good stuff. Because I remember when Eric did talk to me at the it was the last day of the McLuhan Festival. We were all having dessert. Do you remember that? Were you there for that final reception? It was the Sunday afternoon. I think it was the Sunday afternoon.
But
I remember us all kind of being shocked because we actually saw Bob eat food and it was sugar.
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
so at any rate, it was like as soon as I finished talking to Eric, Bob grabs me and he says, "You have to tell me everything he said."
Brilliant.
So for me, like the whole, it's like, it's all very amusing amongst these, you know, these players that play different roles in my experience of ultimately, you know, yes, Bob, but McLuhan, you know. And so because it was, I realized it's like people need to know this stuff. People need to know what McLuhan was trying to say. You know, it's
important. It's crucial. It's crucial.
like for holistic mental health.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's crucial for people to really understand where he was coming from, you know. And Bob is definitely the extreme sports aspect of all of that, and I'm grateful that, you know, he held that kind of appeal for me to draw my attention there for long enough.
It's interesting because Bob has also, like, within the sort of the sphere of the kind of, you know, Facebook community of mostly too conventional McLuhan fans, Bob has kind of, but he's sort of eased into this new role where he's not like, yeah, he's still the extreme sports, but he's also just the, like, any McLuhan at all guy versus the people who seem to just, all they want to do is try to apply McLuhan to just like things that are less than McLuhan and translate it back down into that. And particularly what I'm thinking about in the sense of any McLuhan at all is the idea that, you know, there are all these people that call themselves, you know, I mean, sure, McLuhan fans, but like some of them even call themselves McLuhan scholars, and they actually get offended by attempting to understand the appeal of the current president of the United States, you know, like in the sense, like, that's what I mean by like any McLuhan at all, that like, yeah, like Bob is like extreme sports in the sense that he's like, Trump is a shaman or something, but just in the sense that like, because like the people who are trying to represent non-extreme sports, they won't even go as far as allowing any just sort of open discussion of why is Trump popular without, you know, really rabidly enforcing the extreme moral judgments. right? Which
Yep.
preclude any understanding, and it's totally useless to talk to these people about Trump because they don't want to talk about Trump. They want to talk about their own morals. So the problem is that, like, you have this situation where, like, yeah, Bob represents the extreme sports, but because the non-extreme sports are hanging out way on the other side of the line of even the most basic McLuhanism, they kind of like left the whole field to Bob. Of, you know, it might have been better if there was sort of another person occupying a sort of a halfway point where they're not talking to some non-physical entity for hours every week, but they are willing to, you know, apply McLuhan to understand why the media landscape mutated to create a taste for Trump, you know? Like, it seems like it took the whole 4 years for people to sort of finally arrive at that, because there's just so much just shitty resistance. And because, like, the one guy who was really willing to get into it was so kind of repellently extreme in the other way, a lot of people just don't even want to, it's like,
Yeah.
they don't even want to talk to Bob about stuff because they know that it's like, it might go great for a while, but sooner or later he's gonna turn the wheel hard in the direction of his more extreme, you know, ion world, and people don't
Well, and you know,
with it, and for sometimes good reason, but
you know, the woman that I spoke to, Marissa, she was the first one of my Bon Echo and Friends thing. And you know, in terms of, you know, where she comes from and what her ideal politics are, you know, even she was kind of like going, there's something not right here, you know, about the, you know, the sort of the Trump dynamic, you know. And I think that, you know, that it's, you know, that it's important that, you know, to realize that a lot of this stuff is intuited, and then you hit somebody like Bob and then it's like, okay, you know,
Yeah.
kind of deal. And so it was like, but it's very hard to find people who aren't as immersed in media, like, even like, and this is the thing, that even like McLuhan scholars are immersed in their own media of scholarliness. You know what I mean? It's like they may not watch TV and they may not be doing the day-to-day same kind of routines as the average working folks. You know, they've got a different routine, so they're not consuming as much media naturally anyway because of the work that they do. But it's like, but they're still not detached from it. Like they're still under the surface of the water, which is one of the things that I found very surprising. That it's like, I don't think you guys have done a real media fast.
right.
I don't buy it because I've done one, and I never went back to it the same.
Yeah.
Ever.
It really changes your relationship to,
you know, so this is why you know, you can kind of tell somebody, you know, who's in the McLuhan thing, you know, when they're full of shit, essentially, you know, is like, nah, I don't buy it. I don't believe you've done a media fast. And if you're a real media ecologist,
that's kind of necessary.
it's essential.
Like, people are like, yeah, I mean, people can find themselves at, you know, a very late stage being surprised to be reminded that, you know, part of the message of McLuhanism is that it's not, you can't contain it within a, it's not a subject of understanding only, you know. It's like, it is about your lifestyle. Like, it will bleed into a like religious thing or some kind of a, you know, a diet, or the kinds of things that people associate with a cult rather than a, you know, philosopher, right?
Yeah.
It's like, a philosopher will teach you things, but they're not going to tell you what kind of, you know, food to eat and what kind of, how you should order your life. And not that McLuhan is dictating this to anybody, but like the idea of, you know, just that the idea is like, yeah, it's not just about like, oh, we found, you know, of all the things that people sit around desks and read and write about, we found the most exciting subject to read and write about. It's like, no, like you're not gonna, you know, you're not gonna understand it that way. Like it really is actually about your relationship to the
media.
desk, whatever. More
You
so
know,
than
like, yeah,
that.
it's whether you're considering it like unplugging from the matrix or jumping down the rabbit hole, like there's so many, you know, there's so many different ways to do it, but it's like it has to be a total surrender, complete, of its influence on you in order to really be able to dive in. And you know, it's like, and you also have to be willing to experience the little deaths that come with the realizations, you know.
Yeah.
The deaths of your old paradigms.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't like doing that either.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a real trip, and I have to say that it's like once that shift happened for me, like everything else changed. And you know, didn't Bob say too, like there were a few things that Bob has said that's kind of stuck in my head. One of the things that he said that was that when him and Carolyn were really, you know, like, you know, realize, like coming into their realizations or whatever, right? They had their little apocalypse and everything in their life fell apart.
Yeah.
They went through hell. And it's kind of like, that's kind of what happens when your paradigm has to be disassembled.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and then the other thing that Bob talked about one time, I think it was when he was talking about the evergreens. And he was talking about how they had connected with some kid in the future, and how he was pretty much like Videodrome hooked into, and that his existence was essentially virtual.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're headed there.
I know, right? It's like
Yeah,
like
headed there.
this fast? Seriously?
I mean, that's the thing. Like,
shouldn't I get my flying car first?
It's like before 2020, it was hard to imagine, like, you could imagine us sort of moving towards the possibility of that, the possibility of living like that or something, but then it would still kind of raise this question of like, well, why is that person living like that? Like, why is it preferable to be like, you know, in the pod and living virtually rather than like, it's not a case where like that's the, you know, they like alternate between like, that's like just the fun entertainment, that's the leisure time, but then they also like really that it's like, oh, but then after 2020 you can start to see how, you know, that like they started canceling the real world, not just creating the possibility of living a virtual world, but they started shutting down the real world.
Yeah.
So that's not just about like, yeah, well, we're gonna add this on top of the real world. It's like, no, they're actually like they've started the process of a replacement rather than
it's like Dark City.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, I don't want it to be like Dark City.
So this is the deal, right? So this is why I think it's like, okay, you know, I want to find people who understand what's going on right now so that we can start planning. You know, because it's like, because I don't know, it's like I've been the kind of person personally, like, for instance, well, the Opera House. You worked at the Opera House, didn't you?
I worked at the theater where the opera was before they moved to their proper opera house.
Okay, so the Opera House that was down like in the east end of the city, and
Oh, there was a place called the Opera House, but it was like a band venue.
No, different. I know that one. That was, I saw Train.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
it was really good. To
Was
see Train in there, can you imagine?
Damn.
It was
Okay.
like, it was super early, you know, but it was like, that was pretty cool to see Train there.
I bet.
But no, it was an opera house. They had a, basically, you know, it doesn't really matter where it was. They had this unbelievable sale on costumes.
Oh, okay, right.
And it was
Yeah,
like,
the rehearsal hall is at like Sherburne and King, I think.
that's the one.
Yeah.
Okay. So so it was like they set a date and they said that they were going to be selling off old costumes for as cheap as 25 bucks.
Those
It's
costs.
insane.
So
I found a picture of me wearing this thing. Like it was like full hoops and everything. Okay. It went like 6 feet wide and it had these peaks with pearls encrusted all over this damn thing. Okay. $25.
incredible.
But the way that I got it was being little and paying attention every second that we were in that line because
Right.
I was hell bent because we got there and there were like 250 people in front of us. And I'm like, son of a bitch, I'm not going to get anything. Right. And it was early. Like we were there at like 6 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And so it was like, okay, well, we're here. We'll give it a shot. And then like, I don't know, 45 minutes later, like a whole pile of people just disappeared in front of us.
Weird.
And so we get up to the thing, you know, we're getting closer to the door and then other people are kind of, screw it. I don't want to wait anymore. You want to go for breakfast? And the closer and the closer and the closer, I ended up being in the first 15 people that they let in because I just kind of, you know, because the crowd was kind of chaotic and unruly as it was shifting and changing and stuff. And I managed to get through that door.
Yeah.
And I got a really cool costume.
Fucking awesome.
So I'm kind of thinking like, man, if we can do like, and I've done other stuff like that too.
Yeah.
And I think that I think it may be kind of, you know, a good lesson even too, you know, with Marshall, you know, that it's like if you're watching, and then with Bob, if you just go into that Forrest Gump state of mind and mime that aspect, you can kind of luck into some interesting workarounds.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of the way that I'm kind of looking at it. Because like I don't want to surrender, but I don't want to fight either. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's got to be something else.
I feel the same way.
Yeah. You know. Yeah, I don't want to fight. You know, I don't need war. I don't need to go to battle. I don't need to protest anymore. You know. That was one thing that I wanted to also say too, that back in those days, when I was going to the protests in Toronto around like when they first started dropping bombs on Iraq after September 11th.
Right.
And the thing that really pissed me off about going to that was that, you know, I'm a liberal. I was there as a liberal, right? I was there as a left person.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't identify as a communist ever, you know. And, you know, it's fine for people who do identify that way, I suppose. But it's not never was my thing. So here I am at this protest, and all of a sudden I feel kind of like swarmed by the Communist Party of Canada.
Yeah.
Because they're literally everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not one of you guys, but, you know, cheers, you know? And the one guy said to me, he said, oh, yeah, you are. And he was kind of creeping and stalking me, like through the whole time, like kind of like winking at me, like going, no, you're a communist.
Weird.
Like, and I was like, you son of a bitch, that's why you're here, is to make all of us look like you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
he was getting some kind of an ego kick out of, you know, giving me the wink eye and all this stuff, kind of, you know, like making sure that he kept me in his eyesight throughout, wherever we were moving around and stuff like that, you know. And I was with my ex-husband at the time, so, you know, I didn't feel like it was like a sexual stalking thing. It was a psychological stalking. It's like, if you're here at this protest, we're making you a communist. That was that, you know, that it's like, we're dominating this particular, it's not your free speech, you're one of us now. And I was just like, well, fuck that. So, you know, it's like, I was aware of, you know, the manipulations around that kind of participation too, in terms of my politics way back then. It was like, this is all bullshit and I'm not going to play anymore. You know, so this was why when I found you guys and Bob, and then, you know, what that had all evolved into and how that blew my mind in so many different ways, it's like, it's still the only thing that makes sense. And there has to be a reason why we all intersected, you know, where Bob was and all of that kind of jazz. Like I say, like, you know, I don't want to fight anything. I don't want to, you know, get up on some sort of soapbox and, you know, preach to people or anything like that. I just want to see more people talking about, you know, about what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and realizing that the medium is the message, and maybe we need to take a closer look at that. And maybe we're all ready, you know, finally, maybe we're ready for this, you know, because it doesn't look good, right?
Yeah, no. Oh, yeah. It can be hard to be optimistic.
Well, I don't think we need to be optimistic, but I think pragmatic is good too.